We praise Porsches for being everyday livable sports cars, and what better proof of that would be to subject this 718 Cayman GTS 4-liter to a year-long test where we aim to put around 40,000 miles. Now, we'll take every excuse we can get to drive a car like this, right? And that's where you're probably thinking, oh, poor us. You have a point. The Boxster and Cayman have been on our 10 best list for 16 years running, so clearly this wasn't going to be a strenuous challenge. Now, the driving experience at the end was everything you or I or anyone else might hope it would be, but the long-term experience wasn't always peachy or cheap. Let's get into why. Perhaps the most surprising thing about this particular Porsche is that its as-tested price didn't crest $100,000. It got close though. The base car, which of course we got with a 6-speed manual transmission, started at around 89 grand, and then there was roughly $10,000 worth of options, and that's a light dusting by Porsche's usual standards. Some of those options included things like the espresso brown leather, ventilated seats, Bose surround sound, and gloss black brake calipers. Yes, $900 for black brake calipers. All that aside though, the stuff that matters at the core of this vehicle comes standard, like the Pirelli P0 PZ4 summer tires and adaptive suspension that Porsche calls PASM. The feature we appreciate most though is how Porsche mates this chassis to a mid-mounted 4-liter flat 6 that's also naturally aspirated and sounds like this. This package is just delightful. From the steering to the shifter to the powertrain response and the sound, the ride and handling, to the point where it just got effusive praise in our logbook. We loved the way this thing made us feel. In fact, when you think about how a sports car should make you feel while you're driving it, this is the template. I don't know if there's anything that's out there that's much better. And so if you're out there designing a sports car and you haven't driven this thing, you're doing yourself a disservice. The engine makes a little bit less than 400 horsepower, but the car itself weighs less than 3,200 pounds. And that means at our test track, we were able to get 60 mile an hour acceleration in 3.9 seconds and the quarter mile in 12.1 seconds. On the skid pad, it did 1.03 G and stopped from 70 at 145 feet. That's great performance, but to be honest, if this thing made half the power and was still geared appropriately, I think we'd still really enjoy driving it. The sound it makes from 4,000 RPM, just listen to this. That sound has you looking for reasons to do that constantly. Doesn't matter if you're on a back road, doesn't matter if you're commuting to work, that's a beautiful experience every single time. But of course you expect all that from a car like this. What you may not expect is how livable this Porsche with a GTS badge on it was during our test. Sometimes the GTS models can be a little firm, a little too hard-edged for daily driving. But over 40,000 miles, this thing was just as content on the commute as it was tackling switchbacks or howling its tires around freeway interchanges. In fact, it rides better than some sports sedans. A few people on staff really enjoyed this thing for long distance road trips too, provided they were comfortable driving with just 2 people and with no more than 3 carry-ons. That's what we were able to fit in this car, 2 underneath the front and 1 in the cargo area in the rear. That brings us to perhaps the biggest shortcoming of this vehicle, and that is a lack of options to put stuff when you're sitting inside of it. Look, we know it's a 2-passenger or 2-occupant sports car, but even with that expectation in mind, it's kind of ridiculous. I carry on me, probably like most people, a phone, a wallet, and a set of keys. That's it. But in this car, the options for storage get taken up pretty much immediately with just those items. You have a fold-out door pocket on the driver's side door, and then this shallow bin right here. It gets crazy worse when you add a second person who has, at a minimum, the same amount of stuff, if not more, like a handbag or a purse. With that on board, you basically have no space. Then there's the matter of these cup holders, which have been the butt of jokes in Porsches for decades, it feels like. They've been around a long time, and they still feel rickety and cheap and complicated, and they don't do a great job of holding your drink either. The road noise can also be fatiguing. We recorded 75 decibels while cruising at 70 miles an hour at our test track. Hit coarse concrete or rough asphalt, and the noise can end conversations. Bizarrely, automatic rev matching can't be enabled or disabled independently of the drive modes. It's off in normal, but on in either Sport or Sport Plus until you turn off traction control, in which case it's off again. Why is it like that? It's a mystery. Personally, I'd appreciate adjustable lumbar control, but of course that's an optional feature on this nearly $100,000 vehicle. To be fair though, I was the only person on staff to feel that way. Most people thought these seats were fine. And broadly speaking, most people who left a criticism of this vehicle in the logbook left with some sort of sentiment that said, but this is a small issue. Let's talk about winter. When this car showed up for testing, we mean literally the first day, it got dumped on, like 6 inches of powder on top of ice that came from freezing rain earlier that day. Now, look, we get it. Porsche owners would consider driving a car like this in real Michigan winters like an unforgivable amount of abuse, but we're not most Porsche owners. In fact, we kind of get a perverse joy out of seeing what these cars do in real winter. As for equipment, we set this car up with a set of Michelin Pilot Alpine PA4s, and those were a Porsche spec version. Those tires would cost you about $1,300 on Tire Rack. But because they don't get made in the factory 20-inch wheel, we also had to get a set of 19-inch wheels to get them on. Once it was all equipped and set up, this thing did totally fine in the snow. In fact, when the roads were clear, it actually handled pretty well, all things considered. Another fact of life that's impossible to ignore with a Porsche is the cost of maintenance and repairs for this thoroughbred. We had 4 scheduled service visits. The first one was free, courtesy of Porsche's scheduled maintenance plan. The remaining 3 cost in total $3,200 roughly. The 40,000 mile service, the final one that we did at the end of our test, that cost for an oil change, an oil filter change, cabin air filters, an inspection, an engine air filter, and a couple other things. That alone cost over $1,300. Now, generally, these service visits went very smooth. We only had one hiccup at the 30,000 mile service. That one calls for new spark plugs. When we brought the vehicle in, the tech didn't have the special tool required to access the plugs in this car, which are apparently pretty difficult to access. So we had to bring the car back later when that tool came in. Then you get into the stuff that was our fault, into some repairs too. We had to replace the rear tires just before 20,000 miles. That was around $830, and you can blame our collective heavy right foot for that. We did also cause more damage somehow. At around 26,000 miles, we noticed there was clutch slip happening during high engine speed upshifts, and it ended up being exactly what it sounds like, clutch abuse. But in order to know that, we actually had to inspect the clutch, and that requires removing the transmission. That is not a quick or inexpensive process. You can read the accompanying story with this video to get more information on that. The gist is though, once we got the transmission out and once we were able to see the clutch, it was obvious there were signs of clutch abuse. We don't know who caused it, nobody fessed up to it, but because clutches are wear items, we were on the hook for that repair bill, which was almost $4,900. Fortunately though, during that repair, the techs noticed an oil leak from a chain tensioner, and they repaired that under warranty, and that's likely why this vehicle started consuming about a little over half a quart of oil in the 1,000 miles leading up to that service. That's it for problems, except for one strange one-off where during a drive, the air conditioning would refuse to blow cold and the buttons for the satellite radio just stopped working. The air conditioning came back on like a dozen miles later and the buttons started working again intermittently over the next few days. We have no idea what happened. We couldn't reproduce it and it never came back. Maybe it was just electronic interference or a UFO or something weird. I don't know. Now here's where we get to the no-duh part of our long-term test. Our ownership experience with this 718 was everything you would expect. Expensive, but wonderful, worth every penny. Now, some may tire sure of the lack of interior space or the road noise, but this Cayman is special because it defied that new car stereotype that we simulate with our long-term tests. And that's when that new car ecstasy slowly but inevitably fades into the realities of the daily grind. Not this GTS 4-liter. Not ever.